Two quick programming notes. I really haven't seen this video ahead of time. I got to point 3, stopped, knew I was going to reply. That's note 1. Note 2, yes, this means I'm kind of giving up on the concept of 2 channels. Anyone who experiences the way my mind works knows that it's been causing a lot of stress since I first began to make an attempt at 2 channels. I know those who appreciate these kind of videos may not so much appreciate the other kinds of videos I make, and vice versa. But overall, this will be easier for me. Now, on with the show.
To celebrate Autism Awareness Month.
You mean Autism Speaks Awareness of Our Talking Points Month? No thank you. We'd rather have acceptance.
I'm sharing with you surprising facts about autism spectrum disorder.
Autism Spectrum Disorder. Facts. Number 25. Where have I heard this before? Oh yeah, I made that video. The video you're about to make will primarily be based on the stigmas of autism that are provided by such organizations as Autism Speaks. But I'll be demonstrating that as we go along.
Autism spectrum disorder impacts 1 in 68 kids in the USA.
Well, you did state that you were going to talk about facts, and although you did not communicate that this was a fact, I'm going to treat it as if you're trying to communicate facts. And here are the facts. In the United States, 1 in 68 children are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. This is not a statement of prevalence. This is not a statement of effect. This is a statement that this number of people are diagnosed. Diagnosis, unfortunately, at this stage is subjective. There are no objective medical criteria for which to make a diagnosis. That may change in the very near future, and we can clear this problem up. At the level of the world, approximately 1 in 100 to 1 in 150 persons are diagnosed with autism. This is a more realistic number because in the rest of the world, people don't seek out psychological evaluations on a whim, especially not for their children. There used to be a standard that no one under the age of 10 or who hadn't reached puberty could be diagnosed with autism. There is a reason why there is such a high prevalence of diagnosis in the United States. The symptoms and the stigmatized supposed symptoms of autism overlap a number of other conditions which are not autism. Autism, like ADD in the 1990s, is a good, clean go-to for both psychologists and parents. To be quite plain, the prevalence of diagnosis in no way speaks of prevalence of effect. The second point in regards to this statement that I'd like to make is that, quote, kids, unquote, are not the only people affected by autism spectrum disorder. Autism is a pervasive, lifelong neurodevelopmental condition. That means, in translation, that your neurons, especially the neurons located in the brain, are different, pervasively different. That means for the rest of your life. I understand that your source material, Autism Speaks, would like you to pretend, because they pretend, that autism doesn't affect a person from the time that they are born until the time that they die. But in fact, it does.
#25. Social is key. Autism spectrum disorder is not a disorder of intelligence or language. Instead, it's a disorder based on difficulties with social communication.
Both wrong and exceedingly oversimplified. Autism spectrum disorder is not simply a dysfunction regarding social communications. It is a neurodevelopmental condition. This affects neurological connections within the brain. It is known that an autistic has more gray matter and more densely packed matter in the brain. This can not only affect social communications, but perception and techniques of thought. This is why more autistics are savants than neurotypicals. This is why autistics are more apt to find differing solutions to problems than neurotypicals would. This can also affect the perception in unusual ways, such as synesthesia, problems with coordination, or difficulties with speech. My suggestion before suggesting the prognosis of a condition is that you research that condition to find out what the prognosis might actually be.
24. There is no cure. There's no cure for autism. However, there are a number of behavioral therapies that can drastically improve how a person with autism spectrum disorder acts. Behavioral therapies can include speech, occupational therapy, or applied behavioral analysis.
That's correct. There is no cure, and the only potentially effective cure would be genocide. Any more than ABA is a therapy. Behavioral modification is never therapy. When it happens to neurotypicals, it's called brainwashing. And what else would you call 20 to 40 hours a week where a untrained non-psychologist tells you how wrong everything you do and say is, telling you this for the sole purpose of making everything you do and say correct in a predetermined and politically approved manner? If you don't believe me, and you have a child available to you, have them sent to ABA. Now, I know this child may not themselves be autistic, but that won't matter in the least. All you have to do is state that you have a suspicion. You don't need a diagnosis in most cases. They will gladly take your child and put them through hours of this therapy, as you call it. And once this child comes back, ask them how therapeutic it really was.
23. First described in 1943. Dr. Leo Kanner was the first to describe autism in his 1943 paper, Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact. Unfortunately, Dr. Kanner didn't know everything we now know about autism, which led to a number of myths about autism, including the refrigeration mother.
A myth that persists to today, alongside the childhood affliction myth, the environmental causes myth, the vaccination myth, and the myth that if you throw enough money at a cure, it'll magically go away, etc., etc.
Dr. Andrew Wakefield.
Because of that study, he was convicted of malpractice and abuse of those 12 dependent children. It is not doctor. It is at best former doctor.
20. Late diagnosis is common. Sadly, while parents often report noticing differences in their children at a young age, many children aren't diagnosed for years. In cases of milder symptoms, autism spectrum disorder can go undiagnosed into adulthood.
That's not really the sad part here. The sad part is that most parents are encouraged to take their children into psychologists to be diagnosed with autism at an age when normal development is such that you can't really classify autism. That's why at one point in the past, diagnosis of autism and other severe conditions was not performed until an age where the child was able to interact, or should be able to interact normally with society. The sad part is that so many toddlers have been diagnosed with autism. Toddlers who are behaving in the normal, atypical way that all toddlers behave in.
19. More likely to have older parents. Autism spectrum disorder is much more likely to happen in children born to older parents, meaning mothers over 35 or fathers over 40.
Correlation does not equal causation. The argument being that the age of the parents causes genetic damage to the gametes that produce the child. No such evidence has been presented.
18. 30 to 50% also have seizures. For reasons unknown, 30 to 50% of people with autism spectrum disorder also have epilepsy.
Well, that's an interesting claim. 30 to 50%. I know that's the talking point that Autism Speaks likes to work with, but aren't we a little premature since that research is now ongoing and the number is as low as 15%? Shouldn't we wait until the research is a little more, shall we say, solid before we make such grandiose claims? Now, both autism and epilepsy are neurodevelopmental, and I don't presuppose that there is no link, but I'm not prepared to put numbers on ongoing research, nor should you be.
15. Early treatment is important. While there is no cure for autism spectrum disorder, getting early treatment, speech therapy, occupational therapy, social skills training, and applied behavioral analysis, has been shown to have a major impact on a child's long-term success.
Speech therapy? Fine. If you have a problem speaking and need some assistance, I see no problem with that. Occupational therapy? I see no problem with learning job skills of any kind, so long as the job skills you are learning are not for demeaning labor. And by that I mean make work, the lowest of the low kind of work, which is unfortunately what is usually parceled out to individuals on the spectrum. ABA, however, is not therapy. Imagine, if you will, as a neurotypical, you were considered to be diseased, and part of the way that society deals with your disease is to force you into 2 to 4 hours a day of learning not to act like you have the disease. Now imagine that these days come 5, 6, or even sometimes 7 in a row, week after week. These weeks gather into months, can easily congregate into years. Now I know if I explain this to you from the autistic perspective, you are not going to get it. So let me try to explain this from your neurotypical perspective. What if part of your disease was making eye contact? And you did it so naturally that you were completely unaware that you were doing it. And so you spend hours, weeks, months, and potentially years being told not to make eye contact, being punished whenever you made eye contact, and eventually, as a result, learned how to force yourself not to make eye contact. Imagine how uncomfortable you would be trying to talk to people without being able to make that eye contact. Try it sometime. That is simply one example.
13. Wandering is common. All children can wander off, but studies have shown that children with autism spectrum disorder are more likely to wander off into dangerous situations, like near pools, rivers, and lakes, or busy streets, than children without autism spectrum disorder.
That's a nice bit of fear-mongering there. Yes, autistic children are more curious about the world around them. Sometimes they may wander off. Sometimes it might be dangerous for them to do so. But do we really need to only say that it is dangerous for them to do so?
12. No medical test for autism. As of yet, there is no blood test that can diagnose autism spectrum disorder. Instead, doctors and other professionals use a number of behavioral tests to see what skills children with autism spectrum disorder do or do not have.
Highly oversimplified. Even in my unsophisticated day, when I was diagnosed, they didn't simply test me for skills. They also interview you. It's an in-depth interview with many aspects and points to be analyzed. They then analyze that interview. If all that you're getting when you go to be assessed for autism is skills tests, then you seriously need to get a second opinion.
11. Autism is everywhere. Unlike many disorders that only occur in some groups of people, autism spectrum disorder has been noted to occur in many different races and ethnicities and across the globe.
Point 1. Autism is not everywhere. It affects an estimated 1% of the human population. That is not everywhere. Point 2, because I know that you'll think that I'm misunderstanding you, autism doesn't affect many races or many people in many cultures. Autism can appear in all races, whatever a race is, in all cultures.
10. Has nothing to do with intelligence. While a number of children with autism spectrum disorder have a below average IQ, almost half, 44%, have average or above average IQs.
Has nothing to do with intelligence. 40% have average or above average IQs. The implicit claim is that 60% must have below average IQs. I will need to see some citations. I would also like to see the IQ tests specifically administered. These should be IQ tests that are appropriately balanced for the way the autistic mind processes information. These IQ tests should also not take into account the autistic's ability to speak or their ability to, quote, pay attention, unquote. These should be IQ tests which fully explain the concepts involved in every question so that there is no doubt as to what the question is implying, etc., etc. Oh, but wait. I just remembered. No such IQ test exists. I guess we'll have to find out if those numbers are accurate after someone develops the appropriate IQ test to test the intelligence of autistic persons.
9. Unemployment is a major hurdle. Despite many people with autism spectrum disorder having normal or above average IQs, many struggle to find a job.
I wonder if that might have something to do with the fact that there's so many people out there willing to spread misinformation about autism.
6. New Jersey has highest autism rate in USA.
Not even going to respond to this non-point.
5. Lifelong care is expensive. Probably some of the most surprising autism statistics are the costs for caring for a person with autism spectrum disorder. Over a lifetime, it can range from $1.4 to $2.2 million.
One of Autism Speaks' favorite talking points. It costs so much. Well, the first thing I'd like to know is where's my cut? Because I didn't get any of that money. And the second thing is maybe I should pull out a little bit of statistics on you. Approximately 10 to 25% of the people on the spectrum require lifelong care. That's 10 to 25% of 1% of the population. That is 0.1 to 0.25% of the population. Now, taking that into account, let's compare that to some other numbers. How much is that cost compared to the entire Social Security benefit for all retired persons receiving Social Security? I bet that they are more than 0.1 to 0.25% of the population. How much money goes into veterans' care? I bet they're more than 0.1 to 0.25% of the population. Should I go on? I'm sure if we add up all these other numbers and compare them to the benefits received by some autistic persons, you'll see that it's really not that much. Especially when you consider that these financial burdens are usually carried by the family. But perhaps I could give you a little bit of edification here, because I know that you got most of this information from Autism Speaks and or organizations that support Autism Speaks. Because after all, Autism Awareness Month is Autism Speaks' primary driver for contributions. They work on contributions. They are what is known as a charity. This great foundation, which would gladly tell everyone about how financially burdensome all autistic people are, and of course they're all little kids who can't speak and hardly can hold their head up and are just terrible and get into all kinds of trouble, etc., etc., etc. But here's the education part for you. All the money that Autism Speaks takes in, of all of it, 4% or less goes to any autistic person whatsoever. They want you to believe there's this tremendous financial burden
And they are there to support the families with this burden. Give, give, give. We want your money. You might learn a bit if you look at their publicly available financial information.
Three, differences start young. While most children with autism spectrum disorder are not diagnosed until they're preschool aged, differences can be seen in children with and without autism as early as 6 months old. For example, babies with autism spectrum disorder do not react to faces the way that babies without autism spectrum disorder do.
I get tired of having to explain this point, but I'm going to do it this one more time. Some people in the social sciences have decided that all toddlers should hit milestones in their development all at the same time. They should be able to speak all at the same time. They should have eye contact all at the same time. They should understand this social interaction, that social interaction, this way of playing, this way of communicating, all at the same time. But all toddlers are different. This once was a common axiom that all parents told their children when they had children so that they wouldn't get all anxious when they weren't doing all the stuff as soon as they were born. Somewhere we have forgotten this. All toddlers, including normal ones, will line up their toys. All toddlers, including normal ones, will throw fits. All toddlers, including normal ones, may not learn how to communicate or say their words correctly or in the right order or in complete sentences, even if they're normal. There is a reason, again, that autism wasn't diagnosed until you had reached a certain age. The reason is because the diagnosis is subjective. As you pointed out yourself, there's no objective medical test yet for autism. So the subjective test relies on not only skills and social ability, but also on your ability to interact at a level after you should have learned the social rules of interaction. A 6-month-old baby does not know the rules. They can't know the rules. Not if they're normal, and certainly not if they're autistic. But you can determine the difference because all toddlers take on actions which any nervous parent and any willing psychologist could say are autistic. This is all an outcry for more hysteria over autism. I don't see this kind of campaigning to find out which children who are 6 months old or younger who might have psychopathy or sociopathy. Let's find out who the depressive children are. But for some reason, autism gets to be special in this regard. We can determine that almost at the moment of birth, if you only know which signs to look for. Unfortunately, the signs are the same for normal children. Until children get to a certain age, probably just before they're ready to enter school, do they typify into normal and not normal. Before that time, all children have the capacity to act like anything because they're trying to learn the rules of the interactions that they will have in the future. Those who are having difficulties are not so easy to spot. They don't have a sign. There's no word written on their forehead. There's no way to determine a behavior of a normal child that they will grow out of, and the behavior of an autistic child that they won't grow out of until later, when they have the opportunity to learn how to do so in their particular and unique way. This constant demand for these therapies, specifically ABA, which I know Autism Speaks especially supports, is because there's money in it. Let's get as many children as we can into this system, which generates money. There is no other purpose to advocate for children who may be autistic, which cannot genuinely be distinguished from typical children because they are not of an age where they are distinguishable to be so distinguished. In the case of Down syndrome, we at least have a physical marker. We know the genetic marker. There is a medical test that provides the absolute objective information of whether they are or are not. In autism, all we have as yet is subjective. And the problem with subjective is that anyone can make a supposition and have it be treated as accurate regardless of its accuracy.
2. More likely to die. Compared to others their age, people with autism spectrum disorder are 2 to 5 times more likely to die. This is mostly because of other health conditions more common in autism, like seizures and accidents.
Yet more fear-mongering. The simple truth is, everyone is likely to die. The likelihood of autistics to die is severely enhanced when parents go online and discover that there's this cure or there's that cure. You can chelate, you can detoxify, or when officials in schools or in other institutions decide that electricity passing through the brain is a really cool idea and it really gets those kids under control. Or maybe we should just sit on them until they can't breathe. Perhaps this high likelihood of dying wouldn't be so pervasive if we weren't having so much fear-mongering about autism and how terrible autism is and how much of a burden autism is and how useless in life we're going to be. Just a thought.
1. Can live happily ever after. Despite what many people used to believe, people with autism spectrum disorder can and do live happy lives with the support of their families and community.
So long as you're disabled to the point that you actually require direct assistance to live. If, however, you are capable of living without assistance, well then, you're just on your own. You don't even really exist.
If you want to learn more or want to donate to autism research, check out Autism Speaks at autismspeaks.org.
Which is always so much better than actually speaking to an autistic to learn something about autism, or to actually giving to a charity devoted to actually helping autistic people directly. Now, in the sense of fair play, the following 4 points were correct. And, although not surprises, are non-controversial amongst people who know anything about autism. Congratulations.
22. No refrigerator mothers. 21. Vaccines do not cause autism. 17. Autism and Asperger's are the same. 8. It's in your genes.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom.